Good evening, everybody. All right, 5.5. We're looking at the Constitution today. No focus question because I'm assigning an in-class assignment that goes and takes this thing another step further. So the in-class assignment is due on Tuesday, and that's also going to count for the module. Make sure you get it done. All right, aim. How is the Constitution a document of compromises? Oh, you know what? Just let me put this out there. I will be testing you to make sure you're watching the module. So if you heard that there's no focus question with the module and you got to do the assignment, if you think, oh, I don't have to listen to this, you're wrong. Okay? So, how is the Constitution a document of compromises? Today we're going to take a look at the Constitution. And we're going to understand how things are going to be changing after the Articles of Confederation. So, let's dive right in. 1787. Shays' Rebellion was a wake-up call for the new country. It was a failed rebellion in Massachusetts, but one thing that it did show was it showed the weaknesses of the government that we had, and it showed that something needs to be done to fix this, because basically we have people that are rebelling against the government, and if you're rebelling against the government, that's not a good thing. That's a sign that the government is not working. On top of that, they were rebelling against the government using the same rhetoric that the people that they had used to fight against the revolution. So that was especially stinging because people were paying attention to this. And it was a sign that government was not meeting the needs of the people. And unless something was done, then everything would fall apart. So the Founding Fathers basically realized this, and they got together in Philadelphia, and they called a Constitutional Convention. And this was kind of done in secret. This was not done out in the open. The proceeds were not, carried out in the papers daily. It was all the negotiations from the representatives were done behind closed doors and behind closed windows too. And it was done that way because basically this is a time of fear. There is a great concern that everything could fall apart. And the Founding Fathers kind of realized that they had to really work in order to make something happen. So they all meet in Philadelphia, and they meet in Independence Hall, which is still there in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is going to be the largest city in the colonies at this time, and it seemed like the logical place for everybody to meet. So 55 delegates meet from all 13 states, and basically the intent early on is to revise the Articles of Confederation. Basically, they want to make the government work more for the people. However, they realized really quickly that the Articles of Confederation was ill-conceived at best. So they basically started over from scratch and decided to come up with a new government. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're coming up with a new governance of the United States. So this is kind of sketches from the scene. Photography is not invented yet. So very quickly, everybody's going to turn to gentleman George Washington to kind of lead the convention. He's going to be the one everybody looks to as the person that's kind of holding it together. Jefferson is going to be there. Benjamin Franklin's going to be there. Alexander Hamilton's going to be there. James Madison's going to be there. Basically, it's going to be a who's who of the founding of America. And they're meeting behind closed doors in Philadelphia. So Washington is going to quickly be chosen as the president of the convention. Ben Franklin down here is going to kind of realize just how important this thing is. Basically, this is the future of our country that we're talking about here. And it could all be over before it began. And Franklin was kind of taken by this chair. You can see the same chair right there, that Washington was sitting in the Constitutional Convention. And he noticed that there was a sun that was carved into the chair. And Franklin noted that is the sun on that chair symbolizing the sun rising on our new country, or is it the sun setting on our new country? So basically, Franklin realized that the decisions that were made in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 could basically either doom the country or it could mean the success of the country. it's creating a government that everybody could live with. And the government wasn't working. And very quickly things could fall apart, and Franklin really realized this. So they get down to the nuts and bolts and they start really discussing it. And very quickly there's going to be a conflict over representation. Representation in the Congress. So, before we start talking about the other branches of government, Congress is still supposed to be the focus of the government. So, the Constitution, let me bring one up. Okay, let me bring up the Constitution. Okay, here's the Constitution. Article 1 is all about the Congress. Okay? So, Article 1 is the Congress, and they go on quite a bit about the Congress. Okay? Section 7, Section 8, all of this so far that I'm putting up there, this is all Congress. Okay? Congress is going to be the big thing. Congress is going to be seen as the main focus of government still. But they're going to realize they need something else. So then they put in Article 2, and then they decide to create an executive. An executive is the president. And then they spend a lot of time talking about the president, not nearly as much as the Congress. Notice that. Then they also decide they need judiciary. Judiciary is Article 3. Check this out. There's the judiciary. That's it. And then it goes on to Article 4. So Congress is really going to be the big thing. That's where all the power of government was supposed to be. Yes, they would have a president. Yes, they would have a Supreme Court. But those were very ill-defined. And they were seen as things that you needed to have. But Congress was where the majority of the power was going to be. So Congress is where they spent a lot of their time discussing things and how things work. Now, we have to understand this. The different states before the Constitution were like different countries. So they're all sending representatives together to Philadelphia to meet to talk about the new government. But each one of those states basically is an independent country. And they're sending representatives, and what they're doing is they're talking about how they're giving up some power, because that's essentially what they're doing. They're taking what were basically like independent countries, and they're making one country out of them, these United States of America. Notice the language, these United States, not the United States. Okay, it was seen as many different states, and all of them together are joining in to make up a country, but the country is still all of these little countries that join into it. So basically, the question that they're going to come up with really soon is, since we have all of these states joining together and these states have to give up power, is it more fair that the different states are equal in Congress, or that they are represented based on their population? So essentially, the independent country of Virginia and the independent country of Rhode Island are joining together in this country. The independent country of Virginia has many more people than the independent country of Rhode Island. So here's a population of 1790. Virginia had 747,000 people, the most populous state in the Union at that time. Whereas Rhode Island only had 69,000. On top of that, Rhode Island had about 950 slaves, and Virginia had another 292,000, meaning that Virginia had almost 1 million people, and Rhode Island had less than 10%. So, 10% of that, they had less than 100,000. So, would Rhode Island be just as powerful as Virginia would be? That's a question. Some people are saying, well, yeah, because Rhode Island is giving up some of its sovereign power to join this country, the same as Virginia, so therefore they should have equal rights. And other people are saying, well, no, Virginia has more than 10 times the number of people that Rhode Island does. Therefore, Virginia should have more power. So, Virginia is going to advance a plan for representation in Congress. It's known as the Virginia Plan because they're the ones that put it together. And if they're putting it together, it's going to be something that is going to favor them. They are putting forward a plan. Basically, the government would have three branches of government. Okay, legislative, executive, and judicial. Legislative means that's the branch that makes the laws. That's our Congress. The executive is executing or carrying out the laws. That's our president. And then the judicial branch, which judges the laws and makes sure that everything is fair. Now, with the Congress, basically there will be a bicameral legislature. Which a bicameral legislature means that there's two houses to legislature, an upper house and a lower house. This is what we have today. So, within this legislative branch, there are two parts. Okay, there is the Senate, and there is the House of Representatives. Okay, we have that today. So it is a bicameral legislature, meaning the legislature is divided in half. The Senate is the upper house, the House is the lower house. Now, under the Virginia Plan, both of these, the Senate and the House of Representatives, would be based on population. So you would have more representatives in the Senate and more representatives in the House, the more people you have. Now, because of that, large states, or states with large populations, favored the Virginia Plan, because that would mean that they would have more say and that they would have more power in the new government. Interestingly enough, House and Senate in the Virginia Plan, and this did get carried out in the beginning, the House of Representatives, those representatives would be elected directly by the people, whereas the Senate was chosen by the state legislatures. And that's in effect what did happen. The House of Representatives is the only part of government, and we'll get more into this in a little bit, where the people directly elect those representatives. Most of these other positions in government, the people don't vote for them. The people vote indirectly for the representatives. The House of Representatives is the only branch of government where the people actually elected the representatives in the beginning. Later it's going to be the Senate, but that's not even going to be until about 100 years ago. That's not going to be until the 16th Amendment is passed, where the 17th Amendment is passed, where the senators are directly elected by the people of the United States. So that's a long time away. The House of Representatives is the only place. Now, that being aside, this plan is not going to be favored by smaller states, because smaller states are going to feel like they're giving up their sovereignty, they're giving up their independence, and now their voice is going to be drowned out by these larger states that have all these people. So, New Jersey put forward a plan. New Jersey put forward a plan that would basically favor the smaller states with small population. They also called for a three-branch legislature, or a three-branch government, but the legislature would be a unicameral legislature, which means a single house instead of a bicameral legislature, which the Virginia Plan put forward. And the single house would be basically, it would be equal. So all states would have an equal number of representatives. No state would have more representatives than anybody else. This was heralded by the small states because they were basically putting forward the argument, well, we're basically all giving up power, so because we're all giving up power, we all deserve a voice, and this makes sure that the states are treated fairly. Whereas the large states feel like this would be bad for them because they have a lot more people, and basically you have fewer people in small states that make larger decisions, and that drowns out the people in the larger states. So they come up with what's known as the Great Compromise, also known as the Connecticut Compromise, because it was arbitrated by Roger Williams in Connecticut. And they settle on a three-branch government with a bicameral or two-house legislature. There is going to be a Senate and the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is going to be proportional, which means the House of Representatives is going to be based upon legislation or representation. So the more people you have in your state, the more representatives the House of Representatives you have. Rhode Island would have less representatives in the House than Virginia would. New Jersey would have less than Virginia would, or Pennsylvania. The larger states have more representatives because they have more people. That's the lower house. That's the House of Representatives. And the people would directly elect the members of the House of Representatives for terms of 2 years, which is the same that we have today. When we elect congressmen to the House of Representatives, we go every 2 years to select them. This was seen as the body that was to be the voice of the people. People directly elect them, and they get elected often every 2 years. So if they're doing a bad job or the people are unhappy with the government, they go and vote them out. And that's going to be seen as a referendum on the government. It's going to be seen as a test to see how the government's doing. So if the government's doing things that people don't like, the people can vote those people out, and then the government can get the message and fix it. So that's the House of Representatives. That is the lower house. The Senate, which is the upper house of the legislature, is to have equal representation based upon population. So each state was to get 2 senators, regardless of population, under the Great Compromise. That means that Rhode Island gets 2 senators and Virginia gets 2 senators. It doesn't matter how many people you have, everybody gets 2. So let's do a little quick math. In 2016, there are 50 states in the Union. How many senators are there? Do 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 ding ding ding. The answer is 100. Because there are 2 per state. So Alaska gets 2, New York gets 2, California gets 2. It doesn't matter. If you're a state, you get 2. Sorry, Puerto Rico, you don't get any because you're not a state. Sorry, Guam, you're not a state. Sorry, Washington, D.C., you're not a state. No senators. Interesting. And senators are elected every 6 years by state legislatures, not by the people. This is going to be later changed by the 17th Amendment. But for now, the state legislatures would select the senators. So the only part of government where the people actually selected their representatives in the beginning was in the House of Representatives, and was only for 2-year terms. Okay, so we've got the Great Compromise worked out. We've got the function of government all worked out. Let's move on, but before we can move on, before we can start talking about the presidency, and before this representative piece dies, we have to take a look at things. Now, because of this deal, if inside the legislature there are 2 houses, and the House of Representatives is to be based on population, basically southern states got up and said, well, do our slaves count? Now, this is interesting. One second. Now, this is very interesting. Southern states are not arguing that that their slaves should count because they want their slaves to count or because they think highly of their slaves, but they're looking at it in terms of more power. Southern states have slaves. So if we go back to our chart up here, okay, right here, if we go back to our chart, Virginia had 292,000 slaves. So if those slaves counted towards their representative totals, that's more than the population of Connecticut, for instance. That could significantly increase their power in the House of Representatives. So therefore, southern states want their slaves to count only for purposes of representation. Get that? They want slaves to count only for purposes of representation. They don't want their slaves to be equal. They don't want their slaves to be free. But they do want more power in government. So, because they have so many slaves, they're arguing the slaves should count towards the number of representatives in the House that they're allowed to have. Now, northern states and the smaller states in up north, they said absolutely not. Slaves should not count as people for the Constitution because these people are chattel. You treat them like garbage, so therefore they should not count for you and give you more power in government so that you can continue to advance your own interest. So they had a disagreement. They came up with a compromise, and the compromise they came up with is known as what is called the 3/5 Compromise. This is probably the most notorious part of the Constitution. Notorious is a word that means it has a very bad reputation, and it's something that is kind of seen as this is bad, and it was bad because it's talking about, do slaves count as people? So the Constitution, in the Constitution, it came out that, okay, slaves do count as people for representative purposes only. We are still a slaveholding nation, but for representative purposes only, slaves will count as 3/5 of a person, which means out of every 5 people, that counts for 3. And they came up with this because, well, it does give the states down south some edge. It gives them some of what they wanted, whereas it gives them more representatives in the House. However, it is not going to be full representation 1-for-1, because they recognize the slaves are not do not have the same rights and responsibilities as ordinary citizens. Interestingly enough, this is one of 3 times in the Constitution where slavery is recognized, and this basically says that, slaves are not full people. So that's something that we want to keep in mind going forward, because this is going to be one of the stains of the Constitution. This is going to be one of the sins of the original country. Okay, yes, we are a country, yes, we are a republic and a democracy, but we are going to have slaves, and that's not a cool thing. Okay, now, the system that we set up is known as a federalist system. Okay, basically what that means is there is going to be a balance between federal government and state government. Okay, so the federal government is going to reserve, the federal government is going to reserve powers for it. So the federal government is going to be the supreme government of the land. We are no longer 13 individual countries, but now we are a one country. And we are one country with a single government. However, the states do have certain powers which are which they also have. So the government's balance between state and federal power. The federal government is supreme, and it does have powers that are delegated to it. For example, only the federal government has the power to raise money, or raise an army and coin money. However, the states are to remain sovereign, which means the states are going to remain independent, with certain powers that the federal government could not infringe upon. Okay, for example, the states have the power over education, and the federal government cannot get into that. Some powers are concurrent, which means which means federal government and the state government both have certain powers. For instance, both the federal government and the state governments have the powers to raise taxes. Okay, I don't want to get into checks and balances today, so that kind of gives us a good introduction into the Constitution and how it's going to be a document of compromises. I'm going to give you a couple of assignments that you're going to have to do, which are basically going to look at the delegation of power and concurred powers versus reserved powers in the Federalist system. When I come back, we're going to look at checks and balances. So, there you go. This will help you with your homework. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, and you know the deal.